Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. My family has lived on this property for over 50 years. My grandparents built the house and the big red barn out back in the 1960s. The barn has always been a special place for us. As kids, my siblings and I would play hide and seek in there. As an adult, I still love going out to the barn to relax and reminisce about old times. That all changed a few weeks ago when my new neighbor Tina moved in next door. Right from the start, I could tell she was going to be trouble. The day she moved in, she came stomping over to introduce herself and complain about how close my apple tree was to the property line. I politely explained that the tree had been there for decades, long before she moved in. She huffed about it, but eventually walked away. A few days later, I was out mowing the lawn when Tina came barging up the driveway. "You need to clear out that ugly barn immediately," she yelled. I turned off the mower, stunned. "Excuse me?" I said. "That barn is an eyesore and it's on my property," she declared. I stared at her in disbelief. "Tina, that barn has been in my family for over 50 years. It's at least 100 feet from the property line." She thrust her finger toward the barn. "My survey clearly shows that barn sits on my land. I want it gone by the end of the week or I'll sue." I tried to reason with her, but she just kept ranting about how she was going to bulldoze the barn herself if I didn't remove it. Eventually, she stomped back to her house, shouting over her shoulder that she'd see me in court. As soon as she left, I pulled out my grandparents' original property records. Just as I thought, the barn was well within our property line. To be sure, I called a surveyor to come out and mark the exact boundary. When he finished, it was clear the barn belonged to me. The next day, I walked over to Tina's house with the property records and the new survey. She refused to look at them, claiming they were fake documents. No matter what I said, she kept insisting the barn was hers. Finally, I told her, "That barn has been in my family for decades. I have photos of my grandparents building it and my siblings and me playing in it as kids. That should be proof enough that it's on my land." She folded her arms and said, "I don't care about any silly photos. As far as I'm concerned, that's my barn now." I'd had enough of her foolish claims. A few days later, a sheriff's deputy showed up at my door to serve me papers. Tina was suing me over the barn. I couldn't believe her nerve. There was no question the barn belonged to me, but she was so entitled she thought she could just claim it as her own. I gathered up the property records, survey, and my family photos to show the judge. In the meantime, I had to padlock the barn to keep Tina from trying to move in. Her lawsuit claimed she was suffering emotional distress from not having full access to the barn. The day of the court hearing arrived. Tina showed up dressed in an expensive suit, clearly thinking she'd intimidate me. But I stood firm, calmly presenting my evidence to the judge one by one. When I showed the old family photos of us kids with the barn in the background, Tina threw a fit. "Those could be faked," she cried. "They're fake news." The judge shut her down immediately. "Enough! The evidence clearly indicates the barn is and always has been on the claimant's property. Case dismissed." Tina sat there with her mouth agape, stunned that her ridiculous lawsuit had failed. As the bailiff escorted her out, she was still mumbling about getting her barn back somehow. I happily went home and took the padlock off the barn door. The next day, I was working in the barn when I heard tires screeching outside. I rushed out to find Tina peeling out of my driveway with a trailer attached to her SUV. She had tried to back up and steal the barn. I called the sheriff and reported her attempted theft. When the deputy pulled her over a few miles down the road, she was still ranting about how the barn was hers. This time she was charged with attempted burglary. At her hearing, Tina kept insisting she was an innocent victim. "That's my barn," she claimed once again, but this time the judge didn't tolerate her foolishness. She was found guilty and sentenced to 6 months in jail plus probation. Finally, Tina was gone and the barn drama was over. She'd learned the hard way that she can't just take what she wants just because she feels entitled to it. I'm just glad I had the proper documentation and evidence to fight her false claims. Now I can once again relax in the barn that's been in my family for generations, with no one to say otherwise. The next one is a pro-revenge story. So Mary started working for a college 5 years ago as an administrative assistant. She was given odd and end tasks, one of which was writing up the school handbook. She noted in the handbook that staff were required to take time for professional development. After some years and a few promotions, She landed a manager position in the department and spearheaded an initiative to have all staff under her approved for time to attend professional development conferences. Karen always rejected this idea, but Mary decided one day to go to Karen's boss. We will call him Bob. Bob is great. Once Mary had enough weight in the college, she went around Karen and got Bob to approve conferences for everyone in the department. For the next year or so, everyone got to choose any conference around the continental USA to attend on the company's dime. Everyone would come back with notes taken at every session attended, attached with a conference itinerary, and given to their direct superior as proof of attendance. The employee would also present key points learned from their conference at a weekly departmental meeting. Pretty simple morale-boosting opportunity, until someone had to abuse it. Karen had been bragging to other department directors as well as to Mary about swimming with dolphins during her recent travel to a conference. Mary didn't think much of it, as usually there was sometimes a free morning or afternoon to do with as you please at these conferences. My wife told me this during our nightly pillow talk, and having been raised in Orlando, where Karen decided to attend a conference, my head popped up and I asked, "Where?" Mary replied with a well-known location run by a well-known company with a whale for a logo. I quickly replied, "They close at 5:30. When did Karen have time for this?" Mary, who had access to Karen's itinerary, dropped her jaw when she realized the conference Karen attended did not have free time during the business hours of the dolphin swimming experience. Mary went into an enraged clerical fury as she pulled up Karen's full travel itinerary for flight, hotel, conference, and other reimbursements. The school does most departmental work online, and therefore the school's server can be accessed remotely from secured or approved devices, like Mary's phone. She also checked the website where Karen went swimming to confirm hours of operation. According to the records submitted, there was no way Karen had time to swim with dolphins during the experience's normal business hours without missing part of this conference. And according to Karen's itinerary, she was supposed to have attended all sessions. Mary worked hard to have the privilege to travel the country to attend conferences, and Karen just messed it all up. Mary eventually wrote all of this up, attached the itinerary documents, attached photos of the encounter, and apparently from other theme parks that Karen had neglected to mention, from social media, attached the hours of operation, and sent all of this to Bob. Mary texted me about an hour after she got to work the next day, saying Bob was livid. He was currently in the process of questioning everyone Karen had bragged to see if the stories all matched up. A few days later, Karen was fired from the company for only attending one session of the 3-day conference, lying about her report filed, using company funds for travel, hotel, and food to go play at theme parks, and for submitting a time card to get paid while doing all of that. Although Mary's name was anonymous through all of this, Karen seemed to blame Mary anyways. Karen sent mean and dark texts to Mary several times until the school could send a cease and desist. Worse of all, I guess Karen's husband was a deadbeat, so not only did Karen have to trade in her massive SUV for a smaller vehicle, she had also just signed on a new house only days before she was fired, and now had no income to support the said home. I'm not completely cynical, people shouldn't be homeless, but Karen had also taken credit for a lot of Mary's work, made Mary do Karen's workload while Karen went AFK, and many other instances of foul play I can't remember because there's so much pillow talk. Needless to say, Karen reaped what she sowed. The next one is a petty revenge story. My friend keeps a very clean yard. In the fall, he likes to gather all the leaves before it rains, and they become difficult to pull up. His neighbor doesn't care about his yard, as he has owned the house for a few years and still has not moved in. He lives in a few states away. As my friend was finishing up, sucking up the leaves with his machine, some of them blew into the neighbor's driveway, maybe 20 leaves in total. My friend finished up and went inside. About 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the door and a squad car outside. The officer said they received a complaint about leaves being blown into the driveway. The neighbor had been watching on his doorbell camera and decided this transgression warranted police intervention. You could tell the officer was visibly annoyed as my friend asked the officer to look at his yard and then his neighbor's. The pettiness. The neighbor had an old car shipped and dropped in the driveway about 8 months ago where it has sat ever since. Remember, he still lives in a few states away. While my friend told the officer he would clean the leaves promptly, he asked the officer if he could do him a favor. Check the car for proper tags. The officer saw the car in question and gave a slight smile. While my friend cleaned the leaves out of the driveway, the officers were walking around the car, looking at the VIN and running information. You could hear the neighbor on his doorbell camera asking what the problem was. There is a law that any car in the driveway must have tags and insurance on it. The police gave him a call and told him his car was in violation, and he either needed to put the car in the garage, which would need to be lifted and placed in the garage, or get the registration, insurance, and an emissions check on the car that can't be driven taken care of within 2 weeks, or they will be back to tow the car and ticket him. The guy cost himself a 10-hour car ride to get his car lifted and placed in the garage all over a few dead leaves. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This is my friend Belle's story, and it takes place in the mid-90s when Belle was a senior in high school. Belle had a cantankerous great-uncle named Todd. Like many people in Belle's family, Uncle Todd had served in the army. After being honorably discharged, he took up the family's homestead and worked as a farmer while the rest of the family lived in town about 20 miles away. Uncle Todd was a real old salt, and when I say salt, I don't mean salt of the earth, I mean saltier than a sailor. He was the kind of person who would sit on the front porch with his shotgun and a box of salt pellets waiting for any neighbor kids to try and steal from his prized apple orchard. Needless to say, you were either on his good side or his bad side. Most of the family was sadly on his bad side. Somehow, Belle got on the old man's good side early on in life, and he didn't give her nearly as much grief. When she showed him her letter from West Point, he had tears in his eyes. Beginning when she was a freshman in high school, she was hired to help him out as he was getting up in age. Every day, before sunup, he'd pick her up in his battered old Ford pickup and drive her to the farm. Every time they arrived, he'd tell her, "You're my battle buddy. That means we look out for each other, and you're not to leave my side. Got that?" She'd snap a salute and say, "Yes, sir." They'd get about their day, and at the end, Uncle Todd would drive her home and pay her for the day for a job well done, and treat her to a Coke and a sandwich from the town grocery store. Belle has many fond memories of that old man. That being said, there were some days when he'd be particularly grouchy. This particular story takes place on one of these days, right around Christmas time. Even though most of the family was on Uncle Todd's bad side, he'd still host Christmas dinner as tradition dictated. Once again, he hired Belle to help him prepare the house for the family. Belle could tell the old man was unhappy about something, so she decided to stay out of his way as much as humanly possible to avoid getting chewed out. That being said, he growled and grumbled at her so many times that day that it got on her nerves, and she wished that she had elected to stay home. All that said, she was still being paid, so she decided to stick it out. They were on the second floor of the house, cleaning out the rooms when Uncle Todd went to the storage closet at the end of the hall to get more linen. Now I say storage closet, but it was a small windowless room that was too small to be a bedroom, so it became a storage closet. The lock on this door was the type that would lock on the outside, and unless you had a clothes hanger or knew how to disengage the lock on the inside, there was no unlocking it. Unfortunately, it was a flimsy lock, so trouble was bound to happen. Uncle Todd was in such a foul mood that he slammed the door to the closet shut after he entered. It was so loud that Belle jumped. Unfortunately, he slammed it so hard that it damaged the flimsy lock. She heard him cursing and trying to unlock the door. Then she heard him bark. "Belle!" She stepped out. "Yes, Uncle Todd." "Damn door won't unlock. Can you unlock it from your side?" Belle decided to get back at him for his nasty behavior. "You're my battle buddy, remember. I'm not supposed to leave your side." Cue a stream of curses from Uncle Todd that would have made a sailor say, "Well, I never!" He then finished with, "You're fired!" Belle had just intended to let him stew for a few minutes while she found a clothes hanger to jab the lock, but he had sealed his own fate. "I'm fired. Okay, I guess I'll head home then. Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow. Wait, I meant from being my battle buddy." "Bye," Belle said. "Get back here, right now." Belle snickered as she left to the sounds of him cursing and begging her to come back. Now she had no intention of letting the old salt stay there all night. Since he had the keys, she couldn't drive the pickup truck, so she elected to walk to the neighbor's house, which was a couple of miles down the road. She was strolling down the side of the road when a squad car pulled over. A young man looked at her. "What are you doing out here, ma'am?" "Oh, my great-uncle Todd Logan locked himself in his house, and I was going to get help." "Todd Logan? I wasn't aware the old man had any family," he said. "Yep, he does." Belle said. Well, son of an idiot, the young man said, thinking for a minute. Hop in, I'll help you get him out. Thank you. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Nah, I was delivering some things to my grandmother's. She'll understand if I'm a few minutes late. Belle got in, and the officer turned around, taking them back to the farm. Unfortunately, the lock was damaged to the point that jabbing the clothes hanger in the door didn't work, so the officer had to kick down the door. All in all, he was there for maybe an hour or so. Uncle Todd was nice and quiet and mumbled an apology to Belle after thanking the officer. Belle walked the officer back to the squad car, and while they walked, the officer introduced himself as Adam Smith and asked for her number. She gave it to him, and they started dating after that. Uncle Todd was a lot nicer to Belle after that. The next one is an entitled people story. This is an ongoing mess with my F29 best friend's F30X, M29, and now her ex-mother-in-law. I have her permission to post this. Now, my bestie never married her ex, but for simplicity's sake, I'll refer to her ex's parents as ex-mother-in-law and ex-father-in-law. Bestie and I live together with my parents in a newly bought house. She's pretty much a daughter to my parents, and we are platonic life partners by this point. Her ex ghosted her for 3 years, and has been hounding her ever since he found out we bought a house, trying to get her to take him back and live in our house. We've tried reaching out to the police, but since nothing serious has happened, we've reached a wall and can only wait. Her ex-in-laws no longer live in the U.S., but they did come for Thanksgiving. Though my bestie is no longer dating their son, she offered to pick them up at the airport and take them to their hotel. The reason I was told was that they would do that for her when she was in college. I didn't like it since her ex is a problem, but she wanted to use the chance to ask her ex's parents to intervene and maybe get him off her back. I still didn't like it, but I figured they probably were okay based on how she described them. And I was completely wrong. My bestie arrived in tears and with a scratched cheek. Immediately I asked her what happened, and now I'm seeing red. The next part comes from how my bestie described things to me. Bestie told me picking them up went well, and they had talked about the old days. They asked my bestie if they could stop at a nearby restaurant they always liked, and bestie, being her usual self, decided to treat them to lunch. All hell broke loose at the restaurant, though. Apparently, her ex-mother-in-law demanded to know why bestie did not take her abusive stalker ex back. According to ex-mother-in-law, my bestie is responsible for her baby boy since she was his first girlfriend and they were married in the eyes of God. To start, they never legally married, and bestie is an atheist. So yeah. Bestie tried to defuse the situation, explaining she's moved on with her life after 3 years not knowing where he was. She did try to ask her ex-mother-in-law to convince her son to leave her alone, and that bestie just doesn't want him in her life anymore. Ex-father-in-law seemed to agree with her and apologized for all the heartache and pain she went through. Ex-mother-in-law, however, took over the conversation and began screaming that thanks to my bestie, her son had no life. That apparently my bestie was responsible for her firstborn not having a wife or children. The least she could do is take responsibility and become the submissive wife he deserved. Ex-father-in-law tried to pull his wife away, more than likely because they were causing a very public scene. Bestie simply said she would not ever consider marriage to her ex. She then said it might be best to take the food to go and for them to go to their hotel. She paid for all the food, despite ex-father-in-law offering to cover his and his wife's meal, and drove them to the hotel. At the hotel is where things went from 1 to 100. Ex-mother-in-law had spent the whole drive escalating demands, from taking him back to marrying him to having a child and giving her son the house as the man in the relationship. Ex-father-in-law apparently kept telling her to stop, but there was no way she could be quiet. Finally, my bestie had enough, stopped the car and told ex-mother-in-law she will never take a failure of a man like her baby boy as a husband, let alone give birth to his spawn, that she was glad no other woman had stayed long-term with him since he really won't be a good addition to the gene pool. I gotta admit, I'm proud of her for that last one. Ex-mother-in-law went crazy and jumped on my friend. Her husband luckily grabbed her, but she still managed to get my friend on the cheek. She began screaming she was the reason her family had split, called her a whore with a different word, and said she wished our house burnt with all of us inside. Ex-father-in-law just told my friend to drop their bags on the sidewalk and drive away while he held back his demon of a wife. And bestie did exactly that. The next thing she did was drive back to us. She was not so much hurt by the insults or even the attack, but more the notion that a woman she once saw as a second mother would treat her like this. I told her to just relax a bit, so she's watching some movies with the dogs while I write this and do some work. Tomorrow we're both calling out and just having a girls' day with my mom. I did get in touch with the ex's sister and let her know what happened. She already knew from her dad and asked me if Bestie was pressing charges. She should, but she's not. I tried to convince her, but it's a sore topic for her, so for her emotional well-being, I'm not going to push it. The sister said she appreciates we're not pressing charges and that she will make sure her family doesn't bother us in any way. Apparently, she already had her brother moved outside the city, not sure how or where, but I'm glad he's gone, so hopefully we're done. We're going to avoid going out too often until we know the ex-monster-in-law is gone from the city. It's not a small city by any means, but I wouldn't put it past these crazies to try to stalk my bestie. Update. After Thanksgiving dinner, my mom sat with my bestie to have a serious talk. She told her she didn't want to diagnose her, but she was showing clear signs that she needed help, and therapy could be an option. They had a discussion about it, and my friend agreed to seek professional help. Since she lives with my mom, it's not an option, but mom is going to help her find someone. We just came from filing a police report. My friend won't press charges, but we made a paper trail to ensure that it's at least on the record. She apologized for not doing it immediately and for going to meet her ex-in-laws. I told her I understand she's going through a lot of things. We'll see how things go, but she's like a sister to me, and I refuse to let her go through it alone. As for people saying I have feelings for her, please stop. Like, seriously, stop. She's my family, and I don't see her in any romantic or sexual way. It's annoying that people assume just because I'm bi and have a strong friendship, it means I have romantic feelings. And to the person who made a comment about her ex-in-laws being entitled or Muslim, that is inappropriate and extremely racist. It's the same mentality that my friend and I have to constantly deal with because we're Hispanics. I seriously dislike people like this. Update 2. Just a small update. My bestie found a therapist and is working things out. Since she just started, there's no big, she's all better and back to how she was change. This probably will take months, but my parents and I will support her the whole way. We haven't heard from the psycho ex-mother-in-law or her son, though the ex-SIL sent us a message via a mutual friend that her parents were gone and will never hear from them or the rest of her family again. I send her a message back thanking her, but that I also hope this is the last interaction we ever have. The one thing my parents and I put our foot down was that Bestie had to block everyone from that family and all her social media, and she agreed. We did go again to the police, but it was swept to the domestic matter mindset. We're still pushing to get an RO, and hopefully we'll get a date for court sometime next year. The process is very lengthy. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.